Okay, hello everyone. My name is Elena Martinez. I'm the technical manager for this session. This session is called the Global Diet Quality Score, Measuring the Diet Quality of Populations. Thank you so much for taking part in this, the first session of ANH 2025. We look forward to a robust and interactive session. And now, to get us started, I'd like to introduce Morad Morsi from Intake, the Center for Dietary Assessment at FHI 360. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Elena. Hello and welcome everybody to this learning lab. We're very glad to see you here. Just give me one moment so that I can start sharing my screen and get the PowerPoint going. Here we go, and I'll put it here full screen. Okay, and I'll disable here. There we go. So today we're going to talk about the Global Diet Quality Score, which will help, of course, measure the diet quality in populations. With me here, so as a reminder, my name is Morad Morsi. I'm a senior technical consultant with Intake. And with me here, I have my colleagues Joanne Arsenault, Winnie Bell, and Marieke Wassenaar, who are going to introduce themselves right now. So Joanne, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Joanne Arsenault, Dietary Data Advisor. I'm happy to be here. I'm coming from the US, Rhode Island to be specific. Over to you, Winnie.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. Winnie Bell, Senior Technical Advisor with Intake. I am based in Boston, USA. Marieke, I'm very happy to be here with all of you as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marieke Wassenaar. I'm a Senior Technical Consultant with Intake, been with Intake for about 8 years. I'm physically based somewhere between Switzerland and France, and I wish I could be in person in Tanzania. I wish many of us wish we were there. And excited to meet all of you.
Okay. Okay, so before we go into today's learning lab, I'm just going to very quickly talk to you about Intake's mission. So our main mission at Intake, which was founded in 2016, is to strengthen policies and programs to improve nutritional status by increasing the availability, quality, comparability, and use of reliable dietary data and metrics. So the GDQS is part of that mission that we have been working on since. For today's learning lab, we have the following objectives. We want to talk to you about the appropriate use of the GDQS as a metric of diet quality. We want to show you how the GDQS application is administered to collect data on the GDQS, how GDQS data can be tabulated and used to inform programs and policies, and how the GDQS metric applies to the work of researchers, nutrition program staff, and government leaders. So I believe in the room here, we have a mix of people who have like a different backgrounds, different interests. And so we'll hope that the GDQS metric and this learning lab will cover these different objectives. Okay, so in terms of the session overview, so the first thing we're going to go through is going to go through the GDQS metric itself, describe it to you fully and in detail, followed by a Q&A session on the metric. Then we will talk about the GDQS application, and then we'll do a demo in breakout groups of the GDQS app. Then we will have another Q&A session about the GDQS application and how it went for you. And hopefully during that Q&A session, we'll also have a lot of interaction with you about, the foods and some of the things that, or some of the specific aspects of the application, how it captures things. Then we're going to move to the visualization and the use of GDQS data. We'll give you some examples, illustrative examples of how this works. And finally, the wrap up of the session at the end. So with that, first thing we're going to do here as an icebreaker is that we're going to start with a poll. And the question here for you to answer is, what words come to mind when you think about diet quality?
So yeah, healthy is coming through. There's a lot of different words here. Adequate nutrition. I'm seeing safety, balanced, nutrient adequacy, enough but not too much. Micronutrients as well as macronutrients. Food groups. Nutrients of concern, to have all nutrients. diversified, but I think the words that are coming out strongly are nutrients, balance, and healthy. So well done. This is a great description. Balanced, diversified is coming up. Oh, nutrients have just caught up. Satisfying, I like that one. Yeah, satisfying, I really enjoy seeing that one. Enough, but not too much, I like that one as well. Micronutrients coming up quite a bit. Balance, safety, enjoy, nice one. Yep, great, thank you so much.
Okay, so now let's talk about the GDQS metric itself. So the GDQS metric, in terms of how it assesses diet quality, it's something that we consider as absolutely essential, especially in these times, of course, where people are focused a lot on, food environments, food systems, the quality of the diet in these systems, and also the relationship to planetary health and the environmental impact of diets, right? So this means that the diet quality is an absolutely key piece of data. And of course, there's this quote that we love at Intake, which has been, one of our guiding principles throughout, the years, which is, without good data, we're flying blind. If you can't see it, you can't solve it. To solve, the issues and to research the questions around diet quality and how they affect everything, of course, you need good metrics in order to be able to do that. And we hope that the GDQS will be one of those tools that you can add to your box. So in terms of existing dietary metrics, in the recent years, you've had many new metrics that were developed specifically for use in high-income countries. So that's been something that's been traditionally there in the past, of course, but you can see recently also a trend toward more and more metrics, with some developed only with a focus on prevention of diet-related NCDs, and some which were developed only with a focus on nutrient adequacy, such as the MDDW, for instance, right? So some rely on data from quantitative 24-hour dietary recall to assess the overall quality, or also they can use food frequency surveys. But as we very well know, these types of data and these types of surveys, they cost a lot of money. They require a very high technical capacity, especially in low and middle income countries. And so therefore, we need to think about some simpler metrics that can do the job correctly. And among the simpler indicators that we have now available, quantity of consumption is typically not accounted for. A lot of the existing metrics, they are dichotomous in terms of the food group consumption. It's a yes/no question, but you don't have any metrics that actually try to account for the quantity of consumption, except of course for the one we're presenting here today, which is the GDQS. So if you think about the existing dietary metrics right now, something I wanted to clarify, so that you know where the GDQS stands relative to all of the existing metrics. I hope that you'll find this slide, helpful in terms of clarifying things, because I know some people sometimes confuse, these metrics between each other. Sometimes they have, names that resemble each other a lot. And so therefore we thought about this slide here, where if you looking at your screen, going from the left side to the right side, we're thinking about here, we're talking about metrics that are less complex on the left side. They're not very time and resource intensive. You get the results at the food group level. They do not require a food composition table, okay? So these are the traditional metrics that you know about, the GDR score, which is derived from the DQQ, which is a fantastic tool that's available for so many countries right now. It's a fantastic resource that's out there. And it has been, adapted with the Sentinel Foods so that it can fit within the Gallup polls. So yes, so something that's very quick, very easy to implement, not complex, and basically dichotomous at the food group level. You all know probably about the MDW very well, so I don't need to expand on that. There's also now the NOVA Ultra Processed Food Score, which is one of those more recent metric that's also extremely useful when you are concerned about ultra processed food consumption. And you have now the GDQS, which we're talking about today. So this one requires a bit more time. The interview time for GDQS is between 10 and 20 minutes. You'll get to see that in more detail as we go through this session. And then after the GDQS, so the GDQS is the last of those metrics that does not require a food composition table. So then you have the Alternative Health Eating Index, the AHEI, and the Ultra Processed Food Metric. These are more complex and time and resource intensive, and most of the time the results there are individual food level, and they can be converted to nutrient intakes with food composition tables. So it means we're talking here about FFQ and 24-hour recall data in order to be able to compute the AHEI and the UPF. So the GDQS sits in the middle. It's one of those simpler metrics that does not require a food composition table. And like I told you, it takes about 10 to 20 minutes to collect GDQS data when you're doing primary data collection with the application. Okay, so we're going to talk today, of course, about also the application. You'll get to see it in the demo. We're going to get to see it together. So it's a tool that's simple. Basically, it's entirely food-based. It accounts for amounts consumed at the food group level, and we'll see how it does that. It's been validated. So as a metric, the GDQS has been validated against both nutrient adequacy and NCD outcomes, and also the application has been validated. It's global, appropriate for global uses in low middle income countries as well as high income countries, because the data sets that we used to develop it included both. It uses a pre-classified database of 7,000 food items from across the globe. And the metric has been validated for everyone 2 years of age and up, including, of course, adolescents and adults of both sexes. And you have these different publications that you see here that describe the process of the development and validation of the metric. So what's special about the GDQS? So the GDQS has, like a lot of metrics, of course, food groups, diverse food groups with positive and negative health implications. So far, that's something that you've been seeing in many other metrics, but then it has also the amounts. It allows you to estimate quantities at the food group level. And also, it allows you to be able to get details about specific food consumption within the food groups. And you'll see again how that's done with the application. And in terms of the mixed dishes, you get the information on the ingredients that are used in the mixed dishes. So in addition, so the GDQS is no longer like just a dichotomous yes-no kind of food group kind of metric. It does provide you with detailed insight about what people eat, including, like you see here at the mixed dish level, within the food group, also get a frequency of what people are eating. So it's providing detailed insight into relevant policy and programmatic actions potentially with that kind of data. The GDQS has 25 food groups. So to your left, looking at the screen, you have the 16 healthy scoring food groups. And for those foods, you have points that are given for higher intake. So the higher, in terms of the classification of the GDQS, the higher your classification, the higher number of points that are awarded for these food groups. On the left side, you have the unhealthy, quote unquote unhealthy. These are the food groups that have negative impact on health. And so points here are awarded for lower intakes. So if you're eating no or very low amounts of these things, you're awarding points. And then you have two groups in the middle where they're scored unhealthy when consumed in low or excessive amounts, which means that the points are taken away for too little or too much consumption, but you do get positive points for moderate consumption of red meat and high-fat dairy, because we do recognize that these foods are important for certain age groups, for healthy growth, and so we recognize that they should be there. Now, in terms of when you look at these food groups, so one thing to bear in mind, because people sometimes think that this is a prescriptive kind of thing. Not at all. We're not saying that you should never, live your life without any sweets and ice cream. That would be a very miserable life. So that's not what we're saying here. All that's we're saying here on the left side, but also on the right side, is that, basically there are things where high consumption is encouraged, and things where moderate consumption is the thing to go for, right? These things should not be banned, but we should always, at the population level, programmatic and policy level, aim for moderate consumption. The overall score for the GDQS is 0 to 49. It has two submetrics, the GDQS positive, which ranges from 0 to 32 with these 16 food groups. And then it's got the GDQS negative that ranges from 0 to 17, that has the 7 GDQS negative food groups that you saw, plus the two that in the middle. So in terms of the points that are awarded per food group, you can see them here very quickly. So you have, in terms of the classification, you have low, moderate, and high, with the exception of one food group, which is high-fat dairy, which has an additional category of very high. But most GDQS food groups, they have those three consumption categories. And so you can see here the points that are awarded depending on the consumption, moderate or high consumption of the 16 healthy scoring food groups. Some groups are given more point than others, of course. And this is all related to the epidemiological evidence on the impact of those foods on health. And then on the lower side here in orange, you can see that in terms of the moderate consumption of unhealthy foods is going the opposite direction. The lower you have, the better, the more points you get, with the two food groups in the middle, where you get no points if you don't consume, for instance, high-fat dairy or red meat, because you recognize that you need some of those. So if you get moderate consumption, you get the points. And then when you go to high or very high, there's no longer any points awarded. These are some of the examples that you get for the gram cutoffs and the points. So for instance, for other fruits, the gram cutoff for low is below 27 grams. For the moderate consumption or middle consumption category, it's from between 27 and 107 grams of fruits, for which you get 1 point. And if you're eating more than 107 grams of fruits per day, you get 2 points. And the same for processed meat, but just going the opposite direction, as you can see. Of course, the question is, how can I ask the respondent about whether they had 27 grams or between 27 and 107 or more than 107? How are we going to do this? And this is exactly what we're going to see together in the context of this lab. How are we going to operationalize this? In terms of the use of GDQS data, so these are a few examples of how the data has been used so far. So of course, the main use was population level assessment of diet quality. It's also used to track population level changes to diets across time. It can be used, of course, for within and across country comparisons of diet quality. It helps with the assessment of changes relative to targets, and of course, tracking of change in response to programmatic or policy intervention. So these are all potential and theoretical uses of GDQS data, which have already been done in some countries, as we'll see later. Okay, so I'm going to take a moment here to stop and ask if there's any questions, from the audience about the GDQS metric. And again, you may send your questions by chat, or you might raise your hand and directly ask the question. So I'm going to take a moment here to stop sharing my screen, and I'll go to the chat. Yeah,
just to jump in, great. Thank you so much, Morad, for that presentation. And there are a couple questions that have come up in the chat, but to restate what Morad said, if you want to raise your hand and chime in verbally also, that would be great. I think just going in the sequence of the questions we've received so far, there was a question from Valerie who was asking whether how fortified foods are being considered within the GDQS and accounted for in the 25 food groups.
Absolutely, yes. So the GDQS is not the tool to go for if you are interested in fortified foods. Fortified foods, they get classified into their parent group. For instance, if you have, let's say a whole wheat flour that's fortified, it's classified in whole grains. If you have rice that's fortified, it's in refined grains. So it's the parent group of whatever the fortification vehicles belongs to. And there are no extra points or special points awarded in GDQS for fortification. And so therefore, that's what basically compels me to tell you that the GDQS is not the tool for you if you are interested specifically in fortification. Okay, it gives an overall view of the diet quality relative to adequacy and NCD risk. But if you want to focus on fortification, you need something else.
Great. We have another question. Sorry, the chat's moving quickly here. Another question, which was, what evidence are the various intake cutoffs based on? And so either Marika or Morad, feel free to weigh in.
Yeah, of course. So the cutoffs, historically, if you read the paper that describes the development, the Journal of Nutrition supplement that describes the original development of the GDQS, so that you have a series of 11 papers there using data sets from different 24-hour recall data sets from different countries. And so initially, there was a predecessor to GDQS called the PDQS, the Prime Diet Quality Score, which was used by Harvard. So the GDQS was developed in collaboration with Harvard and with the NSP Mexico and other partners. And so the original portions, they come from the PDQS, which used to use an FFQ with portion sizes attached to the FFQ. However, during the development of the GDQS, they used the 24-hour recall data that was available from all of these countries in order to refine the portions and see which metric performs best at predicting both, the nutrient adequacy outcomes and the NCD risks. And so they permutated, like a lot of different groups, a lot of different cutoffs until they landed. And so all of this is described in the nutrition supplements until they landed on what they thought was the best metric that combined, the performance with the, at the cutoffs that you saw here. And that's what became officially the GDQS.
Great, thank you, Morad. And I see Carmen giving a thumbs up, so sounds like that's clear. Next question is coming from B. Hi, B. And Marika, maybe you can take this one. So she's just asking, so you're not saying it can be used at the individual level, just the population level, right? i.e., can it be used for counseling purposes? Marika.
Yeah, great question. So this is a population-based metric. This has the same limitations as a 24-hour recall. You're looking at the diet, 1 day in the diet of a person. So 1 day is not going to tell you anything about that individual. So we do recommend that this be used at population level. If you're going to use it for counseling, I guess if you do multiple interviews, you can have some information. But yeah, the intention is population-based, definitely.
Great. And I see B has a response. Very true. So next question is coming from Grace, and she's wondering why high points for high-fat dairy and the people who need this are not stated. Morad.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Yes. So the high points for high-fat dairy. And why? And sorry, what was the rest of the other part of the question?
It says why high points for high-fat dairy and the people who need this are not stated.
The people who need this. Okay, so the high-fat dairy can benefit, like many segments of the population, and not just. And we're not necessarily, thinking only of children. We're also thinking of adults. And so when you get no high-fat dairy and the GDQS logic, that's not a good thing because, high-fat dairy can provide all sorts of benefits to health. And again, this is all based on epidemiological evidence, looking at the relationship between the association between high-fat dairy intake and many different health outcomes. And so what they come to, the conclusion that they come to is that it has a benefit up to a certain point. And when it becomes extremely high intake, then it becomes detrimental for your health again. And so the range in which it's supposed to be beneficial for your health is the one for which, GDQS awards points. But then when you fall into excess consumption of high-fat dairy, this is when the points are taken away again. And this is true for all segments of the population.
Okay, great. Thank you, Morad. The next question is from Utami, and they're asking, how do we determine the cutoff? Is there a standard? And also, can this metric be used in all countries? Marika or Morad? I'm not sure.
Marika,
Go ahead, Morad. It kind of relates to the question you answered before. Yeah, so go for it, Morad.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the cutoffs, so the cutoffs, I invite you to read the Journal of Nutrition supplement that describes basically all of the different combinations and permutations that the Harvard team along with NSP Mexico and us and Intake did in order to develop the most performing metric in terms of the relationship with health outcomes. And the original portion sizes, they come from the ancestor, which was called PDQS. And could you repeat the other part of the question, Winnie, again? Cutoffs and?
Yeah, it was the cutoffs. Is there a standard which is related, and can we use it in all countries?
And you can use it in all countries. Of course, this was meant to be global from the beginning. So you'll see that in the data sets that were included in the development of the GDQS, you have a lot of data sets from Africa, from Asia, including, for instance, in Asia, you have India, we have China, we have other countries, and we also have the United States as one of the data sets that was included in development GDQS, so they can be representative of all different types of patterns of diets.
Absolutely. Great. The next question is, how do you account for dietary differences based on food availability in different seasons?
Marika, would you like to take this on?
Sure. Yeah, I'm waiting for the question on popcorn. I'm excited about that one, but I'll take this one.
Oh, I don't see that question, in fact.
Oh, we can come back to it. It's above it. It's a reply of a reply. That's why you might not be seeing it, Winnie. But the question on dietary food available in different seasons. So when we talk about the GDQS app, which is the tool that was specifically developed to, collect dietary data in a simpler way than a quantitative 24-hour recall, really what we try to do is develop a tool which you can use more often, collect data throughout the year. So to account for food availability in different seasons, we would recommend collecting data in these different seasons. So collections across the years, multiple collections. And when we talk about the app, I hope you were convinced that the app allows for that.
Yeah. Great. So, okay, I'm going to go to the next question, then I'll go up to the popcorn one, Marike. The next question was, it's coming from Mohammed, asking how flexible are the cutoffs to diverse dietary patterns of different populations? So we've partly already addressed this, but if you want to speak to it, Armand.
Yeah, no, very briefly again. So yes, so these cutoffs, since this was meant to be global, since it was meant to be a simple metric that anybody in the world can pick up and use almost immediately in their country. So what we've tried to do is that we try to include as many data sets that are representative of different eating patterns across the world. All the way from, like I told you, United States, we have Ethiopia, for instance, in the GDQS, we have 11, I think, African countries, we have India, we have China, we have many. So it's basically the results of all of these analysis combined that provided us with what became the best performing metric among different permutations, which is the GDQS now. And if you want more details, please go to the Journal of Nutrition supplement to see all of the papers in describing, the development of these of the cutoffs and the indicator and how it performed.
Great, thank you. So we're going to take this last question and then move on to the next series of presentations to go a little deeper related to the app. So this next question, it looks like it's coming from some deep personal experience, maybe with GDQS, which is great. And so the question is, we had problems categorizing popcorn, whole grain or snack, ? And also snacks such as samosas, which sometimes have a little meat and sometimes maybe more meat. Sometimes they're not deep fried and also produced from home rather than purchased, and I guess implied that they'd be fried. So how do we deal with these kinds of foods in more nuanced categorizations?
Well, I'm taking this one because I really like this question.
Okay,
so
go, Marike.
So just to say that I think, to be very honest, corn and corn products were probably the ones that made us have the longest discussions and intakes, and with partners as well. We had long conversations on popcorn, and we need to make it, we needed to classify this across the world in the same way, right? For comparability. That is what we do. We classified into GDQS food groups for the global context. We appreciate that popcorn is made very differently. In my house, it's, air blown, and I consider it a relatively healthy, quite a healthy snack. I understand if you go to the cinema, you're going to get it full of like butter and salt and whatever chemicals are in there. But we compromised on, and I call it a compromise because I think a lot of this is compromises. We compromised on popcorn being whole grains when it's salted, and popcorn going under sweets and ice cream when sweetened. That's what we went for. And so this is something, you know, when you're using the GDQS app, this happens automatically. When you use other data sources, we're asking you to respect these food groups. Snack is not a food group, so whether it's eaten as a snack or a meal doesn't change anything. For samosas, we understand, and this is also the beauty of the app, I'm eager to get to the app, is that we break up mixed dishes into their ingredients, and the ingredients are classified. So we treat a samosa as a mixed dish, and we ask about these fillings so that we can capture this bit of chicken or whatever is in the samosa. We also have a step in the GDQS app that asks directly about deep fried foods, like fully immersed in oil, because this is something we need to capture. And then there's follow-up question on whether it was purchased or fried at home. So again, we're trying to capture specifically purchased deep fried foods. So that's how we dealt with it in the app, and we can show you that during the demo.
Great. Thank you, Marieke. So that takes us to the end of our Q&A session right now. We're going to have a couple other opportunities and one in about 30, 40 minutes, really in-depth Q&A, so we can really get into it after seeing the app. So hold any other questions that you have, please don't forget them. You can throw them in the chat or just note them down. And I'm going to hand the mic over to Marieke now, who's going to take us to talk about the app.
Okay. And since I have the mic, I'm going to break your rule that you just said, Winnie, to just answer a follow-up question on the popcorn. The question is butter. So if somebody just reports butter with popcorn with butter, we might enter it as 2 lines, and butter is not classified. So if somebody just says popcorn, we wouldn't probe, and it would just be capture the popcorn. Butter is not classified. Okay. Moving on, so Murad just talked about the GDQS metric, and now I would like to talk about our GDQS app, which is something we are very proud and excited about. But before I start, I wanted to do a quick poll everywhere. Quick and dirty, oh my goodness, I wasn't expecting that. Great answer. Easy, accurate, time-saving, diet monitoring, convenient. Diversity, broken up. I like this one. Easy, accurate, time-saving. Quick, easy. Easy is really coming through. Convenient. Faster process. Privacy, I like that one. Yeah, what's coming through very strongly is convenient, easy, and I guess the time is probably time-saving. Easy to coding, good one, good one. There's no data entry needed after data collection. Okay, great. I think we get the gist, Murad. I think we might be ready to move on.
Okay.
We at Intake developed the GDQS application, GDQS app for short, for easier and more frequent collection of high quality dietary data. As I said before, we're very proud of this app, and we hope to get you excited during the session and the demo. The app was designed for global use. So wherever you are in the world, you can ask to use it, and with minimal adaptations, it will serve your content, your purpose. It's relatively simple and easy to implement. Data collection, as Murad mentioned before, is estimated to take between 10 and 20 minutes. It really depends mostly on the complexity of your diet. It requires minimal training and no nutrition knowledge. We typically recommend, training of enumerators of maybe 2 or 3 half days with, quality checks of the data submitted and just a lot of practice. They usually get the hang of it quite quickly, which is great. The app was designed to work offline. So you don't need internet doing data collection, and you can submit data from the home screen, which is something we will show you at any time. Many of our users, when they use the GDQS app, also have other survey modules, and the dietary data can be easily integrated into these larger surveys. A key feature of the GDQS app is that it automatically classifies foods and ingredients of mixed dishes into the corresponding GDQS food groups. And of course, the app provides automatic tabulation of GDQS, also GDQS positive, GDQS negative scores. This is not shown on the app itself. We're avoiding, enumerators telling the respondent a score. This is something that is automatically generated in the dietary outputs, which you can download. The app is free to use, and we at Intake gladly support technical support for this app. Next, Murat, please. So I wanted to just talk about a few features and that make the GDQS quite innovative and on traditional methods, and things that were really important to us during the development, and things that we are proud to have here. First of all, a key feature that we wanted to have in our app is this open recall. So we feel this is a great benefit. Many of you might, I think many of you might be familiar with a quantitative 24-hour recall. This step is the same as the first step of a multi-pass. So it's like the first pass, the quick pass. But what this means is when we collect data with the GDQS app, we have a full record of everything consumed the previous day, and we can use this in many ways. An other key feature of the app is that it has this built-in global food database of more than 7,000 items, which Murad mentioned previously. And this means that the app can automatically classify each reported food and ingredient into the corresponding food group. And this then takes the burden off assigning foods into correct food groups from either the enumerator or the researcher. And very importantly, allows this comparability across different contexts and across time. Another key feature of the metric, and therefore also of the app, is that it uses, it uses 3D cubes that are shown here in the printer of specific sizes to allow the estimation of ranges of intake at the food group level. So what the app does, and you'll see this during the demo, is in the final step of the app automatically puts all foods that belong to a given food group with that food group, and they're listed together. And then the respondent is asked to think of all of those together and point at the cube that corresponds in terms of volume. And just remember that we're not trying to estimate precise amounts of food groups consumed. We're simply trying to categorize each respondent as having low, medium, or a high range of consumption. In the case of high-fat dairy, it can also be very high. So we're just trying to categorize people into a range of consumption. So all of these features in the app mean, if you can press next, Murad, we'll have a pop-up come up, exciting pop-up. All of these features then allow for frequent and standardized collection of dietary data across season, as one of you noted, can be important. Next, just to tell you a little bit more about these cubes, as I said before, there's a set of plastic cubes. There's 10 of them with predetermined sizes. These are cubes that can be printed in a 3D printer. They're actually, we share the specifications. They're pretty straightforward to print. They've been printed in many countries across the globe. People tend to not have any issues printing them locally. And as I said, they're used to estimate ranges of consumption at the food group level. Here's a picture of them being used in the field. This was in Nigeria. And just to say that people tend to really enjoy these cubes. They're interactive, they're fun. People tend to not struggle with them. Next. So the GDQS app is available in several languages. Both the interface and the database that runs in the background is available in many languages. That means that the drop-down menu works in all these languages. To date, we have the languages stated here. When users request a language that is not available, it is on the user to do these translations, but we greatly facilitate the process. Next, please. These are up to date today. The app has been around for about 4 or 5 years now. These are today where the GDQS app has been used across the globe, really. You see some countries here in Africa, some countries in Asia, even in Central America. It's been used in about 15 countries, and we have regular requests for data collection in different countries. The survey sample sizes of these surveys have ranged between 200 to 300 plus individuals. Today, I had a student ask if they could collect data in more than 10,000, if that would be a problem. The answer is no, that should be perfectly fine. As we mentioned a few times, data collection is expected to last between 10 to 20 minutes. And then something that's really great is that we have worked really hard to create a very extensive database. And when we have new users in a country where the app hasn't been used, we give users the opportunity to review this database and add foods that they feel might be needed. But our experience has been that users tend to find almost all foods, and the number of missing foods from the database, which then during data collection have to enter manually, in many of these contexts have been less than 1%. Next, please. So I guess me telling you that this app is great is not enough. There's been a few studies to convince you of this fact. Well, the first one was a feasibility study done in Ethiopia. This was done back in 2021 in 2 regions of Ethiopia with very diverse dietary practice, also different languages, and Amharic and Somali. And the key findings is that enumerators found the app easy to use, and this was in the early stages. I think it's running even smoother. And respondents tended not to have any difficulty using these cubes. I've put a link here to the publication on our website. Next, Murad. This is work carried out by Sabri and colleagues in Thailand. They looked at the performance of the GDQS app in predicting nutrient adequacy and metabolic risk factors with about 600 Thai adults, both men and women. And they found that the GDQS app outperformed the GDQS and other metrics in terms of correlations with nutrient intakes from 24-hour recalls and food frequency questionnaires and associated NCD clinical outcomes such as BMI, blood pressure, cholesterol, etc. And they concluded that the GDQS app effectively assesses risk of nutrient inadequacy and metabolic risk in population surveys. So very positive findings. Again, the link here is at the bottom. And then finally, next slide, please, Murad. This is a study done by our team at Intake that has just been published. And really, we were looking at these cubes. And what we did is we derived GDQS data from weighed food records and from the GDQS using cubes and also Play-Doh as an alternative method. But the study concluded that using the GDQS with cubes or Play-Doh was equivalent to the weighed food records in assessing diet quality as measured by GDQS. So very positive findings to convince users that those cubes work. Okay, enough from us. Next slide, please. Before we send you off to the demos, I just wanted to quickly talk to you about the steps at a very high level, just to make the demo a little bit easier to follow. Next slide, Murad. So the app uses 7 steps to collect dietary data. The first step is a really quick step, background information, which can be customized to your context. The second step is a big step, important step, where we do an open recall of a 24-hour reference period, whose are hopefully found in the drop-down menu. In step 3, we ask respondents to provide ingredients of any mixed dishes that might have been mentioned in step 2. In step 4, there's probing for more details. This probing is very minimal. It's probing only when it's needed to select the correct GDQS group. Step 5, specifically about purchased deep fried foods, because we do need to know that they're purchased. Step 6 is a quick step that asks about caloric sweeteners, just because these are often forgotten. And that finally, it takes you to step 7, where quantities are estimated at the food group level using cubes. So yeah, now we're ready for the breakout rooms.
And then welcome back, everybody. I can say, I don't know how far everybody got, but in our group, we got cut off just as I was starting to go into the quantification screen. So if anybody else felt, okay, so maybe Murad, you could just, for the sake of example, show a couple food groups, or Marike.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it because I have it open there, and I had the same issue.
Great. And then there's a couple questions. Yeah, there's a lot of questions we can discuss.
Great. So the good news is we have a lot of time for questions and answers. We built that in. And so I'm going to show you, this is step 7. So we got super exciting adding new foods in step 2. We got really excited, including myself. And so we have a huge interview. They're usually not this extensive. So in this example, the respondent reported eating different types of refined grains and baked goods. This person consumed rice at lunch, bread as a snack, white bread, and roti at dinner. So I don't know if you were able to see the cubes, but these are the cubes. I've got them now stacked inside. When you do the interview, you would have the cubes lined up, one next to each other. And you would ask the respondent to think of all these foods together in the form they were consumed. So this rice, of course, you have to think about the cooked rice, not the raw rice. So all these foods in the form that were consumed, if you visualize the volume of it together, which cube comes the closest in terms of volume? So let's just say, I'm just going to make this up. Let's just say that this corresponds to cube 5. Sometimes there's a follow-up question. When you select the cube that exactly corresponds to the cutoff, you'll get a follow-up question. Was the amount of all those foods you consumed as big or bigger than the size of the cube that was slightly smaller or slightly smaller than that cube? Another example here is white tubers. White tubers, this respondent had bush onion, yam, and flour. And again, you go through the same process, try to think of these all together. Yeah, do we need more examples? Or are we?
I guess I'll ask everybody who's listening whether, before we move on to some of the other questions, if so there's one question related to what Marike is showing us that's coming up, which is, or a comment, I guess, it's difficult to visualize if food is on a plate into cubes, and also if roti can be visualized in cubes. Maybe Murad, you want to talk just briefly about the study in Washington, D.C. that grappled with, was to address this exact question a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we agree with you. We had our own doubts about whether, people would be able to, do this kind of abstract thinking of thinking about foods that are from different eating occasions, like you had rice for lunch, and then you had some bread in the morning, right, for breakfast. And then you're trying to ask them about the rice and the bread combined, and the bread may be cut in slices. It doesn't necessarily fit well in cubes. Maybe rice is a bit better, but you can see the difficulty, of course, when visualizing how it could be difficult to visualize. So we had our own doubts about that. But the good news there is that we've noticed from both the feasibility study in Ethiopia and then more formally in the validation study when we looked at this information against between the weighed food records and the GDQS with the cubes, we've noticed that actually people, even we might think, people have trouble with that. In the end, they don't have such a huge issue with it, right? And the reason for that is because of two things. First, is because the cubes are, people are not meant to think about the cubes as containers in which you put the food and stuff the food in there, right? That's not how it's meant to be used. And we explained that to people during the interview. Those cubes are meant to be like visual representation of how much space something occupies in space. How much space does the food take? If you think of it, right? Like if you think you're holding it in your hand, how much space does it take, right? And the cubes are only there to help you visualize, different sizes of those spaces, right? Like it's a small space, it's a big space, and that's how the cube is meant to be. And this is where people are, it's much easier for them to think about foods in that way. That's number one. Number two is, as you may have already had a glimpse of that in the presentation, you've seen that what the GDQS does in terms of quantification is that it tries to classify the individual for a given food group. So let's say in this case, the refined grains, the rice and the bread combined, it's trying to basically classify the individual as in like low, medium, or high consumption, okay, with certain cutoffs, as we've seen. Now, the good news about the cubes is that it's not necessarily something that is asking for information that is like 100% exact. Like it could be, for instance, that whether the person chooses cubes number 4, 5, 6, or 7, it doesn't matter because they will be classified still in the same category. It doesn't matter if they choose cube 8, 9, or 10, they will be classified in the same category, right? So even if people make some mistakes about the estimation in the visualization of the amounts, that they might hold in their hand of that rice and bread combined, there's some, flexibility in the GDQS metric and in the cubes and the way they work, some flexibility there to still, even with that error, allow you to classify the individual in their true, true in the sense of, however, close you can get to the truth in the true, in the correct classification, right? And that's why the study that estimated, the results from the GDQS using the weight food records. So in this case, people actually wrote down everything that they ate in grams versus the interview with the application that was done the day after. This is why we saw that the GDQS score between those two methods were equivalent because of, this flexibility around the size of the cubes.
Great, thank you, Murad. And just related to that, there was like just confirmation that then the tortilla, based on your response, the tortilla or roti would be in a larger box.
Yes, we're trying to again. We're not. Don't think that. Think about exactly the tortilla and all the other things. Think about the amount of space that they will occupy, and then the cube that comes closest, and that's your best estimate how that works. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to try to just sequence questions in a flow that makes sense, but hopefully not miss anybody. So there's a question asking whether, so you have probing questions after each foods are entered, but you train the enumerators to ask the probing questions when entering foods, like following up in the breakfast section, did you drink tea, etc. I'm wondering whether participants typically miss certain foods when describing their meals.
And I'll jump in here. I think when doing trainings, I think step 2 is the one that requires the most training and practice. It's the same skill as, the quick pass of a 24-hour recall. So it's trying to walk a person through the day, put it into context, and ask about, foods that you think might be part of that meal, but without pushing, right? Without sort of eliciting, desired responses or anything like that. But having watched people with a lot of experience with quantitative 24-hour recalls, I see them doing more probing that the GDQS app requires because they're trained in that manner. So it's the probing that is required in step 4 is fully decided by the app, right? It knows when you need more details. But in step 2, really what you're trying to do is record the food as it was reported by the respondent. So if somebody says milk, you don't need to go and ask, oh, was it cow milk? Was it soya milk? You just record milk and trust that the app will ask that. But I think you're asking about, sugar, milk, and tea. Yeah, so some probing is needed. I hope I didn't go in circles in that answer.
Okay, thank you, Marieke. Another question, which I guess in some way kind of ties into this, it's come up in a couple places, both actually in my group and then in the chat right now, which is related to condiments, spices, and seasoning, but also the addition of fats. For example, B gives the example of adding oil or French dressing. How and when is this quantified? But also like tomatillo sauce and addition of spices, seasoning. So I know there's some nuance in that response, and it depends on the form also when it comes to spices and seasoning. But does anybody want to take that question?
Yeah, sure. I can take a first shot at it, and Marieke, please feel to complete. So in terms of seasoning and spices and things that are used in small amounts in the mixed dishes. So first thing, in step 3, you will be able to enter them, and you will probably find a lot of those things already in the database. Information number two is, depending on the forms of some of those spices, whether, for instance, they are completely powdered and dried, or whether they're whole, they can get classified into either not classified according to the GDQS logic, or they can get classified into, let's say, seeds or dark green leafy vegetables, depending on their form, right? Information number three is that we do realize that a lot of respondents will not have the ability to report on the list of spices that they have in their mixed dish because they bought it outside a restaurant or something like that, or they didn't prepare it, their mother did. Or their father did, who knows? And so it's not possible for them to tell you, right? So the good news here is that the GDQS still works very well in assessing the overall diet quality of the person, even in the absence of precise information about the spices and condiments. So in terms of the data that you get from the GDQS app, in the open recall, you will probably get the list of spices and condiments if the person told you about them and you added them in the application. And then, like I told you, depending on their form, you might find them that they, as accounted for in the GDQS score or not. One thing I just wanted to say here, in terms of the not classified, when we say that something is not classified in the GDQS logic, it's not because we consider it as something like negligible or unworthy, or it's not something not to pay attention to. Far from it. You have foods in there that could be potentially very important ones, like insects or coconuts, for instance, right, are in there. The reason why we put something in not classified is because there is no strong scientific evidence to be able to confidently, tip the scale to the GDQS positive side or the GDQS negative side. It could be like a mix of scientific evidence. And so therefore, because of that, we remain neutral on their effects on health. Over to you, Marieke, if you have anything to add.
Okay. Marieke, you okay if I keep going?
No, thank you. I'm good.
Okay, great. One question that came up from before, but is again kind of related to the condiment question a bit, was if we are looking at NCDs but don't classify butter and salt, aren't we missing some key risk factors?
Marieke, would you like to go for this one?
I think it relates to the question that, look at the statement you just made, right? Like, we don't classify butter.
Yes. So again, we made a decision so in terms of salt, as you probably already know, outside of like doing anything that has to has some urinary secretion for salt, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to say anything about salt using the classic, recall methods to estimate salt. So for salt, you really need to go with the urinary biomarkers. These are the golden standard for anything related to salt. And so this is why we do not attempt to do anything with salt in terms of the GDQS. In terms of butter, the decision has been made to keep it, keep it not classified. And the fact is that, this is the thing that has provided the best performance in terms of the relationship between the GDQS and NCD risks when they did the analysis of all of those, 24-hour recalls that were used to validate the metric to begin with. So they did try the permutation of including and excluding butter, and the GDQS performed better when butter was not classified. I mean, remained neutral on butter.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe just to add that, these fats and oils are particularly difficult to estimate, and this is supposed to be a simple metric. And so butter is not classified. Liquid oils is a food group, and the cutoffs for that liquid oil are pretty low. So the app currently has an algorithm that predicts consumption of oil based on number of mixed dishes and pouring and using oil, like a follow-up question. And we plan to make adaptations to the app to make this even better. But it's a tricky one. Oils are tricky, but it does, it's helpful to think of the cutoff being so low that if anybody uses oil, I think it's 7.5, 7.6 gram. If anybody uses oil, they're likely to already be in the high range of oil consumption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I kind of answered Grace's question by accident there.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. Thank you for weighing in on that. Great. Yeah. So then there is another question, which I'm gonna combine a couple questions. So it's a question about how does the GDQS perform against other diet recall softwares like Intake24 and ASA24, and also how can we link the GDQS with a population survey? And then also, kind of related, have any studies been done to see how the quantity estimates match with the more time-consuming quantity estimate in the 24-hour recall? So that just gets the comparison again with 24-hour recalls.
Yes. So in terms of the comparison with the 24-hour recall, when we wanted to see how the GDQS app performs, what we wanted to do when we did our own study is that we did not want to compare it to another method that shared the same bias, which is the recall bias, right? Because remember, the second step in the app is pretty much the same as the first pass of a 24-hour recall, right? So a lot of shared biases there. So what we did is that, and I invite you to read the published study recently, is that we compared it against the weight food records. Complete weight food records, so as not to share the same biases. And in there, as I told you earlier, I think we told you this already, is that the results between the GDQS score from that weight food records and from the GDQS app were equivalent within the pre-specified margin. So that's the good news in terms of how the GDQS app and the cubes perform relative to methods that require more time. In terms of the comparison, so this was not meant to be like a direct comparison against a 24-hour recall, but Sabri's paper in Thailand, or Sabri and team, the big fantastic team at Mahidol University in Thailand, what they did is that they basically computed the 24-hour recall computed the GDQS score from a 24-hour recall data set that they had. They computed the GDQS from a food frequency questionnaire that they also had in Thailand, in Mahidol. And then they collected GDQS data using the application. And then they basically compared the performance of those three GDQSs, the one with the application, the one from the 24-hour recall data, and the one from the food frequency questionnaire, against metabolic outcomes and other types of outcomes. And there was also very good news for us, which is the GDQS app performed as well or even sometimes better than the 24-hour recall or FFQ data in terms of the relationship to those outcomes. So there is something to be said for the simplification, right? For when you basically make it easier for people, for something to be said for the standardization, because the application systematically classifies everything like exactly the same way. So basically it's all this evidence is pointing that the metric and the application work very well on all fronts.
Great. Thank you, Morad. There's another question that came up, which was how, and my screen is not showing for now. So how can we calculate the amounts of raw materials used to prepare the dish? For example, dals can be thick or thin. Are we asking about this? So I think this might be a clarification about how we're recording foods, actually.
Yeah. So I think the answer is we are not trying to quantify foods in the raw form. We're really trying to quantify not even foods, food groups in the form consumed. So we'd have to ask the respondent to visualize this in the form consumed, if it was thin or thick, and do their best to point at a cube at the food group level. Yeah.
Great. And thank you, Marieke. There was a question here that relates to the last link that I just dropped in the chat box, which was, can the GDQS be used for assessing dietary scores for children 6 to 59 months? Somebody want to take that question? And I shared the child validation study here.
Yes, so you'll be able, so the GDQS has been validated for children 2 years and up, but there is nothing that we can do for the 6 to 24 month age group because of breast milk and breast milk consumption, breastfeeding. You need another approach in order to adequately address, the diet quality of that age group and to account for breastfeeding.
And luckily, there's great indicators out there for that age group. And just to say that the app currently works for 10 years up. We're in the process of adapting the app for use from 2 to 9, and it'll be out in a few months. We'll let you know when it's ready.
So there was a question. Are the people the GDQS was used for in the validation study, I assume this is referring to, for educated on seasonal eating of diversified nutritious foods? So maybe if you just want to comment briefly on
so on which you mean the study conducted in BC for unseasoned foods? Is that the question?
It says on seasonal eating of diversified nutritious foods. Were they educated? Were the participants educated on that? But this was entered earlier, so it's a little hard for me to know exactly what it's tied to.
No, so no, there was no specific. I mean, we could not detect any specific kind of training or like pattern, in the population on which we conducted the study. Even though it was not like a random study, random sample. It was a purposive selection sample, but we could not detect any like specific pattern that pointed to like a super healthy extra diet or whatever. And then the other thing also I'll tell you about this is that. The skills that you need or the kind of work that you need to do in order to be able to estimate the foods with the cubes and everything. The way we set it up is that it does not require high numerical skills or like high level of literacy in order for you to be able to do the work or like estimate things, properly. And as Marieke mentioned, in the context in which we use the cubes, people enjoy them. When we formally assessed this in Ethiopia, very early on with the feasibility study, like almost 80% of respondents said that they had no particular difficulties with the cube. And mind you, that was in a context where some people have some shared eating from a shared plate, right? So even in those cases, people did not find report any difficulties specifically with the cubes.
Here. So I'm going to give you two questions. One's very straightforward. Well, both are. Okay, one is just checking about if the app is compatible with Android tablets or is it mobile only? And I think we'll come to that also in the next presentation. And then also, what about with ultra processed foods in general and not just deep fried foods in terms of, I think, considering the classification or the probing?
Mm-hmm. So, In terms of yes, so the application is available on Android. It's an Android application, right? That's what we have right now. There are plans in the future, but they're not immediate to also possibly make this available also on iOS, iPhones, and iPads. But as you very well know, most people working in low-middle income countries, they don't use iPhones and iPads. They use Android devices. So that's why the app is focused on Android right at the moment.
But Murat, I think the question was whether it works on a phone or a tablet. So yes, it works on any Android device, whether it's a phone or tablet. I think the only thing to consider is the screen size. You don't want to go too small with that screen. And one thing we really discourage is using Android emulators on computers because the reliability of it works differently. It wasn't tested in that way, and the submitting of the data is too risky. So no emulators, please. Yeah.
Android only, yes, B. What was the other question? We can please remind me. Sorry.
It was just about again, this was entered earlier, so I think context might be important, but it was about just generally asking what about UPFs, ultra processed foods in general, and not just deep fried foods. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So the good thing about the GDQS application, if you collect data with the GDQS app, is that you do have the open recall. So if you set up yourself correctly, at the beginning, then you might be able in that open recall to catch some of those, ultra processed foods with sufficient detail to allow you to classify them correctly according to the ultra processed, logic, ultra processing logic. So the GDQS app itself does not concern itself with ultra processed foods, and it's not meant to do that. It's not meant to replace whatever tools people use for ultra processed foods. But if you do have the opportunity, if you set up your work correctly, to be able to get to that, because it uses an open recall, which means it asks everything that the person ate the day before, and it's, as you can see, you can write down things in detail. And so it is something that you could be done if you wanted to.
Great. Okay, thank you. I think for the sake of time, we're going to move along now, but there might be a couple minutes at the end again for some more questions.
Okay, so let's talk very briefly in the time that we have left here about visualizing and using GDQS data. So how have people used the GDQS so far in terms of informing policies and programs and other uses? Okay, so the GDQS so far has been used, as you can see, and I basically, you chose just a few titles here to illustrate the kind of work that's being done with the GDQS. So the first one, as you can see, is an effect of an action, research, nutrition intervention on the GDQS. The second one is the influence of the food environment on diet quality, and they use GDQS here. And the last one, which is something that's derived from the GDQS, I'm going to talk very briefly about, is the GDQS meal and GDQS menu metrics. So the GDQS is used in the context of food system and environment studies, and that's being increasingly done, especially because in the context of those studies, a lot of research institutions and partners sometimes find that they need a bit more detail about what people are actually eating. And again, thanks to the open recall, that is something that you can get with the GDQS app. It's being used in the context of intervention and program evaluation, with a baseline and an endline kind of design. It's used to assess and review tax policy. Then we have an example from Nigeria in a report that I'll tell you about in a moment. It's being used to assess the quality of institutional feeding programs, especially school feeding programs. And here I wanted to bring your attention to the work that we at Intake with Winnie are doing with the Rockefeller Foundations and the World Food Program and other partners on the GDQS meal and the GDQS menu that are used to evaluate the quality of the meals and the menus that are available, especially in school feeding programs, something that I encourage you very strongly to, read more about, because there's excellent work being done there. And it's derived from the GDQS. And many more uses. So these are just a few examples that I had the time to bring up in the context of this learning lab, but you can see that the GDQS literature is kind of exploding right now. In terms of the way people analyze and use the GDQS data, it can happen at many levels. Going from the score, the metric itself, all the way to information at the food level, because as you saw from the open recall, you can get to that level. So this goes from, it goes basically through the submetrics, positive and negative, and also the food group level with the amounts consumed. And so I'll give you examples here from a report in Nigeria. And all of these, of course, are used to unfold policies and programs and other contexts that we mentioned here. So the example that I'm going to show you from Nigeria is taken from a report that was produced by Intake that's called Country Stories That Inspire, Motivating GDQS Data to Action. It's got the Nigeria example in there, but Nigeria is not the only country. There are many other countries, including, for instance, Niger and Ethiopia and other countries. So you can find this report if you want to see how the GDQS's data was used by those countries. I invite you to go and download the report from our website so you can get a better sense of how it's being used. So here from that report on Nigeria, in a chapter called A Paradox of Healthy and Unhealthy Food Consumption Among Nigerian Women Living in Wealthier Households, you can see here that at the beginning, if we're looking at the GDQS score level, you do have the possibility to estimate something called the risk of poor diet quality outcomes. And this is done, as you can see down here, in the footnote to the graph, where, if you have a GDQS score that's below 15, you are considered at high risk of poor diet quality outcomes. And it's been validated that way. And then you have the moderate between 15 and 23 and low above 23. So that's the kind of first cut when you want to look at the overall quality on the data, see what's the percentage of the population that's at risk of poor diet quality outcomes, and you can get that directly from the GDQS metric. Now, one level deeper, you have the GDQS positive and the GDQS negative, and this one allows you to dive into more detail to understand, what's driving, either the good or the bad quality or the low or the high risk, right? Is it more because people are not getting enough of the good stuff, or because they're getting too much of the bad stuff, right? And so here you can start to see differences between countries, differences between wealth quintiles, et cetera, okay? Now, one level, again, if you go further deeper into the analysis, you can now, for each and every one of the food groups, like you have the examples here of refined grains, white fruits and tubers, you can look at basically the percentage of the population. In this case, we're talking about non-pregnant women that are consuming low, medium, and high amounts of those unhealthy food groups, okay? So you're no longer here in a dichotomous kind of situation where it's or like a sentinel food kind of situation where you basically have a yes/no consumption. No, this is more nuanced thanks to the cubes and thanks to the application that basically allows you to see in more detail what's happening within those food groups in terms of consumption, okay? And as you can see here, for instance, so like when I told you give you the example of Nigeria that wants to think about its tax policy on sugar-sweetened beverages, you can see here that there's a clear effect, of the wealth quintiles on the consumption of those beverages, with the highest quintiles, having much higher consumption than the lower ones. And it is something, of course, that is a big concern for Nigeria. So in here, again, it's one of those examples where you can basically, for each one of those, when you go one level deeper into the food groups themselves. So you're looking here at refined grains and baked goods, right? So that's the food group. And now you're looking within those food groups, what are the main foods that are driving the consumption of refined grain and baked goods? So that's something that no other metric can give you, which is the details within the food group about the frequency of the consumption of each one of those foods within the food groups. And again, that can also have some very interesting, programmatic implications, policy implications, when you were able to look into such detail. one thing that I wanted to show you very quickly here, and I'm going to get out of the presentation and stop sharing for a moment here so that I can share my something that we like showing. It's on our website. It's on the GDQS visualization tab on our website. So give me 1 second here very quickly to show you this. So these are, you know, again, when you are here looking at, here you're showing the food and beverage consumed for each healthy, and so healthy on the left side, unhealthy on the right side, GDQS food group. Okay, so we're looking at the example of Argentina here, but of course, if you you can switch countries. This is, you know, data that was available from public available data. And so, you know, when you click on one of those food groups here, like dark green leafy vegetables, basically those sunbursts allow you to basically look into the detail of each one of those groups. You know, what are the foods consumed in them, right? And so it's the same thing here. For instance, for white roots and tubers, we can go in and see. So, you know, these represent the frequency of consumption of each one of those foods. And then you can basically navigate back up and then start exploring other food groups. Okay. Exactly. So we can move on to questions and answers that you might have about anything that you saw during this learning lab. Over to you.
Okay, so there's some questions. Some of it has been dealt with in the chat just regarding breast milk, and you know, that Murad had mentioned that we are not focused on children under 2 because quantifying breast milk can be difficult in dietary surveys. B was coming back wondering, you know, whether they would asking yes or no or on demand. Whether some additional information might be useful. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on, you know, the discussion around the sort of decision to exclude it to exclude.
Yeah. Not
Yeah,
for
no, no,
10, we assume not for 10-year-olds.
You never know.
No,
You never
and
know.
yeah, thank you. No, absolutely, you're right. But the thing is, there are already, you know, like very excellent tools that are already being like extensively studied and used and validated, you know, for things related to exclusive breastfeeding. And we felt that, you know, that space was kind of well represented there. And so we didn't want to, like, you know, crowd that space too much. But the other thing also is that it was difficult for us to combine that information with, you know, the information that you get from older age ranges to basically represent something meaningful. And so this is why we thought that we should focus on, you know, the older age ranges, and especially, you know, the adolescents, where there's a lack of information there. And yeah, so we made that choice.
Yeah. One small comment, like I urge you to look at the publications. The cutoffs get really small. The gram cutoffs for some food groups are really, really low. And these children are not eating a lot, you know, a lot of they don't eat a lot of calories, so it gets tricky.
Yeah, so Marieke is urging everyone to read. I'm dropping it in the chat again. It is the very newly published nutrition review supplement on the GDQS child validation studies. It's a whole series. There's also a paper in there on the GDQS meal and menu metrics that Murad mentioned. So check that out. If you have questions, send us an email, and happy to discuss further.
And there are Deksha, there are no plans to compare the GDQS to ANH2025 or ASA24. Simply because it does not, it's not meant to compete with them, right? It's a different tool. So yeah.
Yeah. And there's also Index24, just to add to the mix, another 24-hour dietary recall tool that's housed at Intake. So if you're curious to learn more about that, also feel free to reach out. Any other questions before we do a final wrap on slides on the Learning Lab? Okay, I see maybe one final question. Thank you, Grace. So data in Nigeria is on non-pregnant women. Any data on the youth population, teenagers to young adult, as they are the largest percentage of the population? Marieke, do you want to?
So this is data from the latest food consumption survey in Nigeria. They did not include adolescents in their national survey, so then that data is not available.
Okay, so Marieke, over to you now.
Great. So I'm going to spend 10 seconds, if I may, sharing my favorite thing, which is the poll everywhere. So thank you for those who managed to. I'm not able to present it. There it goes. So your view. What is your one-word impression of the GDQS metric? I'm seeing excellent, interesting, motivating, convenient, comprehensive. I think interest, excellent, stand out. Use is probably a lost word somewhere there. Thank you. This is great. So I'm just going to quickly wrap up. Murad is going to show the slides. Just to say, if you're interested in the GDQS app, please reach out to us. So it's not available in any stores. In the Play Store, it's not available there. But if you email us to gdqs@fhi360.org, we will respond. It works on Android devices. You can collect data offline and submit afterwards. The use does require printing of 3D cubes. We've had very few officials not printing them in countries. The app requires very minimal adaptations. Step one is customizable to your context, where you want to add some basic demographic questions or whatever you want to do. And step 6 with additional sweeteners. And in addition, you can, if you wish, review the database. I also wanted to guide you next slide. We have regular courses on the GDQS metric and application. The next one is scheduled in September. There's courses ongoing now, but those are ongoing. The next one is in September. And if you're interested, we'll put this link in the chat as well. Fill in this form and we'll reach out to you. These are, 4 sessions that last 90 minutes. We do, and you get your hands on the app, so it's quite fun to do. Then I wanted to guide you to a lot of resources, the ones that Winnie has been putting in the chat. Maybe one that hasn't been mentioned is the toolkit. But I think you're getting the slide deck. I'm not sure. There are a series of links. And then finally, in the last slide, just to say we'd love to hear from you. So please contact us on GDQS@FHI360. Please do go to our website, have fun with those visualizations and also other resources that we have here. And we'd love you to follow us on social media. And here are links to our accounts. And many of you already do. So thank you for that. So over to you, Murad, with 1 minute to spare.
1 minute to spare. So I'm just going to take this minute to thank you so much on behalf of all of us at Intake for your presence at the Learning Lab here today. I also wanted to thank you so much, Elena and Harley, for facilitating and for helping us out with the organization. Extremely appreciated. Thank you for all of you for being here. And yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and contact us.